Okay, there we go. We finished with talking about divorce and the effects of divorce on child development. And we had mentioned, I believe, divorce is a process, not a single event. And so, when we look at divorce events, something that is not commonly recognized is if the female or the woman in the relationship is the one, and we're talking about male-female divorce in that dichotic way. Usually when the woman is the one that is initiating the divorce, it actually started 2 years earlier than when the divorce actually occurred in the legal sense, when the papers were filed and the court was going through the process. On average, women start planning a divorce and planning a separation 2 years before the actual divorce period. For men, they tend to be a little bit more impulsive. They usually start planning a divorce about a year or 12 months, as you would say, before the actual divorce event with the filing and everything. Okay. And so this is what is meant by divorce as a process, because there's a beginning process where individuals start planning, they start disconnecting emotionally, socially, and physically, and then they go through the actual event. And what we have learned is that children actually, parents, I know, sometimes think that that their child doesn't know what's going on, but they do. We found that response to divorce starts to occur when either partner starts the disconnecting process. And then after divorce, we know that it's at least a 4 to 5 year adjustment period for a lot of children. And if you think about childhood, that's a significant chunk out of a child's life to adjust into the patterns of a divorce. Okay. Now that when I say 4 to 5 years, it is an age issue. So we see that, in early childhood, it's that 4 or 5 years, middle childhood, 4 years, and then adolescence, it takes about 2-3 years to adjust. So there is some age variance on the adjustment period. But we know that the younger the child is, the longer the adjustment period to a divorce is. Okay. And unfortunately, the thing that happens with a lot of divorces is that there's a lot of parental conflict, disagreements about things like custody, about who should own what or have what. And on the emotional level, there's a lot of anger that is occurring. Because, if you think about the relationship cycle, you begin with this promise that you'll love and honor each other till death do us part, right? And then when that final break comes, there's still a lot of anger and animosity on both sides. And one of the unfortunate parts about this is that also in some cases, not all, but in some cases, that anger translates into the children being used as the pawns to get back at that other partner. Now, that's not all divorces, but in a subset, we see where a parent will use their children not for legitimate health and well-being for the child, but for revenge in a sense, or that need to alleviate their anger. So they'll drag the parents through custody things. If a parent gets upset, they'll immediately start doing custody. They'll seed things into the child's minds that they feel will get back to the other parent and those kinds of things. So there's a lot of mind games that go on. Now, that is not to say divorce cannot be a positive thing for children. Okay. So I brought up the negative aspects of divorce, but when it really comes down to it, if a couple is not in a place where they can't provide a loving, caring environment for them and their partner, they can't provide that loving and caring environment for their children as well. Okay. And so it's important to note in this component that divorce can have a positive outcome. And the other part of divorce too, there is some biological aspects to it as well. All right. In that the biological set for what's called pair bonding. Okay. Pair bonding is what we would call a cross species when two partners get together for mating purposes and then for the care and welfare of that offspring until they can be self-sufficient. Okay. On a biological level, we're designed to pair bond for about 4 to 6 years. Because at around 4 to 6 years, and I know a lot of parents would go, no, that's not true. At around 4 to 6 years, our children are actually biologically prepared to care for themselves. They know how to access resources. They technically know how to shelter themselves for warmth and the like. They know how to, from an evolutionary perspective, hunt, fish, get turnips from the ground, those types of things. So from a species perspective, around 4 to 6 years, it doesn't need the investment of both parents anymore. And what we see around the 4 to 6 month is that the pairing, the biological pairing, the amphetamines that are released that keep us excited and invested in another person, those amphetamines stop to be produced in the system. And this makes you feel more disconnected. Now, what happens though is opioids start to be released in the system. And those opioids give us a calmer feeling with our partner and kind of a relaxed, they're not going to be cheating. We don't worry so much about things like cheating or worried about them leaving. And those opiates kind of calm us down. And what we see is around a 4 to 6 year period is when we see the high spike in divorce rates. Okay. In fact, that is the highest level of divorce rates that you'll see is in the 4 to 6 year range. Okay. And from a kind of an evolutionary biological perspective, it kind of starts to make sense when you think about a species responsibility in spreading their genes and the like. So we see those kind of things. So divorce is not necessarily a negative thing. Part of it is biologically fixed. I will tell you that on the happy end, though, if we were to get into this conversation about this, is does 4 to 6 years mean that you're just going to fall out of love with the person? No. But I will say this, that the most successful couples will say, married for 20, 30, 40 years. I think there's even a Facebook meme about this that says, being in love forever means you fall in love over and over and over for the same person. And that's what we find is successful couples every 3 to 4 years actually do something to revitalize their relationship with each other. So they go on cruises, they go do adventurous things together, they find a new hobby, they change things up, and they constantly change things up. Okay. And, on that note, even on the sexual level, we know that successful couples that are together 30, 40, 50 years, I mean, they have a very exciting sex life because they continually change and experiment in that area. So bottom line is that I don't want everyone to think, well, I'm only biologically prepared to be in a relationship for 4 to 6 years and then supposed to move on. The other part of that is that we are humans and we have the adaptable ability to continually fall in love with that same person over and over and over again. So that's what I would say about that anyways. Okay. Okay, so that's divorce. We see the positive, negative end. We see the biological end of it. The bottom line is that if the environment is becoming so toxic because of two individuals can't see each other anymore, it is better for that child if they do separate and they do divorce and find their own path. But it's going to be what's the saying? It's going to get worse before it gets better, because that's what we find with a good number of divorces and situations. I would say that in the best situation, if divorce is going to occur, is to assure that quality co-parenting continues. And again, not using the children as pawns for the person's anger and emotional feelings towards that other person. So, all right, enough on that. All right, step parents. So eventually, most people will end up finding someone else, and will find another partner. That's just kind of how we work as human beings. Not everybody, but most everybody. So we should talk about step parenting. We do know that on average, again, this is average. It's not all relationships, but on average, there's a strained relationship between step parent and stepchild. Okay. And we know this contributes to the second highest divorce rate. Okay, so on your second relationship, now I'm not going to say on a second relationship. So you divorce your first partner, and then you marry the second partner, or get involved with a second partner. There's a 60 to 67% probability that relationship will end as well. In fact, what we see is that, the first relationship is usually the highest statistic. The second relationship is the second highest statistic. And then it starts to reduce beyond that. And that's, the joke about, third time around is the successful time around, and those types of things. So, but on the second run, it's usually, slightly high. It's 60 to 67% chance that it will end up in disillusion as well. And it really has to do with, usually if in a step parent situation, the step parent is walking into a relationship that, one, has been damaged because of that first family relationship. And the child really still has bonds for both of the parents. And now comes in this person who is going to try, or at least try to be involved in the family system. And so there tends to be a lot of confusion on the child end. And in addition to that, the child starts to see the parent give that step parent that same type of affection and love that they gave to that person who was now separated from, they divorced from. And if you think about that, especially when we're looking at early childhood and middle childhood, that can be a very confusing thing, because if you think about it, it's like, okay, so we'll just take this example. Mom is giving this guy the same amount of affection, same amount of love as they did my dad. So what's to say that this guy is going to be around any longer than my dad? And so there's a lot of trust issues, especially the younger the child is. And this is where it says adjustment period for new step families is about 5 to 7 years. And again, it's the same kind of thing. When we look at early childhood, middle childhood, it's 5 to 7 years. When we get into adolescence and even early adulthood, it's, it's still about 3 to 4 years of adjustment. So there's an age gradient that we have to keep in mind. Most important factor for the child's well-being are the number of transitions and stresses, parent-child relationships. Okay, and what this really means is that the more a child has a consistent parent figure, even if parent figures are added to the situation, the better off the child is. Okay, so maintaining relationships. So when you have a step parent kind of situation, the step parent should be a consistent part of that child's life. And if that other parent, the natural or biological parent, is healthy for the child, they should be also consistent in that child's life. Okay, so that's kind of the point of this step parent kind of situation. So what about LGBTQ parenting? Because there's been a lot of things, if a child is raised by a gay or lesbian, are they going to end up gay, lesbian themselves, and the like? And the true answer is no. As the APA said in 2005, there is no evidence to suggest that lesbian women or gay men are unfit to be parents. And the other statement, if differences exist between children with gay and lesbian and heterosexual parents, they are likely to be small or moderate in magnitude. So these were done, these two reports were done in 2005. This one was done in 2012. But the thing that I always like to caution students who are interested in studying LGBTQ situations is really you don't want to look at research 2012, 2011 under, okay? What happened in 2011 is that the federal government actually started to be able to release funds for researchers to do research on LGBT communities. Before that time, the research tended to be funded by interest groups. And when that happens, the findings usually always fit what the interest groups wanted. So if they were pro-LGBTQ groups, their research tended to find, like the APA 2005 found, that there's really no differences. If they were anti-LGBTQ funders, the research tended to find that there was significant harm to a child. Okay. What we know about research since 2012 is that there really is no negative effect on a child being raised by a gay couple or a lesbian couple. Indeed, what we find in these types of situations is that gay and lesbian partners have the same exact difficulties as heterosexual parents. And what I mean by that is they have the same divorce rate, they have the same domestic violence rates, they have the same cheating rates. And what we're really looking at in the relationship side of it is there's really no difference between LGBTQ committed couples and heterosexual paired couples. And on the on the parenting end, what we have found is that there's really no effect on the child's sexuality. So if the child identified as heterosexual, being in a gay or a lesbian parenting situation didn't change that sexuality. And vice versa, if the child identified more as gay or more as lesbian, that didn't change either. Just like in heterosexual relationships, it really doesn't change their sexual preference or their sexual identity, okay? So what we know right now about LGBTQ parenting is there seems to be zero negative effects when we compare to heterosexual relationships, because not only do they have the benefits that we see in heterosexual relationships, that care, bonding, taking care of each other, the affection, those types of things. But we also see statistically on the negative end of heterosexual relationships dealing with, again, domestic violence, divorce rates, all those kinds of, we don't see any difference between the two relationship type of setups. So at this point, what we can say about LGBTQ parenting from a scientific perspective is that there really is no positive or negative effect when we compare to heterosexual parenting outcomes. Okay. Now, what do we know about foster, adopted children? Okay. The one thing that I should say right from the beginning is for children who are adopted out of the health and welfare system. So they were in a foster home and they got adopted. Around 95% of those children, when they turn 18, will return to their family of origin. Okay, meaning that they'll go back to their natural parents when they turn 18. And that may seem like a startling statistic, but that is what we see, is that when it comes to adopted children. Okay. Now, the younger the child is adopted, that statistic reduces some, but especially when we're talking about middle childhood. So children who are adopted during middle childhood or adolescence, there's that about 95% chance that when that child turns 18, they'll return to their family of origin. Okay. And the other thing that we see with especially adopted children, but also foster children, is they start to lead what we call a double life. Okay. So they will leave they will live the fairy tale life with their adopted parents, where they're in a loving, caring home with the celebrations of the annual years and all those kinds. They live that fairy tale kind of life, quote unquote. But then on the side, usually very secretively, they engage in those behaviors that are more familiar to them, that are more common to them. So for example, when I have an adopted daughter, and when she was in her teen years, we're talking 13 through 16, she very often snuck out at night to go be with individuals that were more familiar to her biological mother, and would engage in those kind of behaviors that her biological mother engaged in. And then she would come back and live that kind of idyllic life, quote unquote. I'm not going to say I'm a perfect parent, and my ex-wife was not a perfect parent, but we established that safe home, quote unquote, kind of thing. And so she basically lived a dual life, and that is something that we find is very common for children who are adopted, especially the older and older that they're adopted at. Okay. And again, the goal of foster and adoption is to provide some type of stable home when the natural parent is unable to provide it. One of the goals of, the foster care system and the like is to provide as similar to a home environment as possible. And that's why the United States has adopted the foster care system instead of the orphan care system. Because in the foster care system, you can provide as close as possible to a natural family home setting than in the foster care, than in the orphan care system, where it's an institution, more of a hospital kind of care type of system. Okay. And we found that when the system works, it works really well. But when the foster parents or have dysfunctions of their own, when the foster parents are doing it for the financial reasons, we find that it still has some very negative effects on those foster children. Okay. And probably some of the difficulties of foster care is one, anxiety living with a new family. And that's why we want to keep it as close to a natural family setting as possible. Disruptions in things like education, because often many children will be taken from foster care to foster care. I adopted my daughter when she was 12 years old. And by the time she was 12, she had lived in 16 different foster care um, settings and 16 different families. And so, uh, and then intermittently, she was given back to her mom. And so this disruption in education and separation from friends becomes a very difficult thing for a lot of these young children, especially in that middle child region. So the question about if they will have to move again, return, is constantly on their mind. Is this place, uh, you know, is this a place I can stay, or is this a place I'm going to have to leave? And they have anxieties about going back to their natural parents at some point, especially if they themselves were abused. And this can cause some very acting out behaviors, as I explained earlier. They can live a dual life. They can sneak out and live that life that is more familiar to them from their natural parents, and then try and come back because they're not sure what is consistent. So they're trying to maintain some type of consistency in their life. And what is something they know they can control is that chaotic environment, that disruptive environment that they were raised in with their natural parent. So that's something that they feel they can control. So let's talk for just a minute about friendship and social status, okay? And what we find is there's some, we have peer rejection on one end and peer acceptance on the other, okay? So on this scale, I'll kind of do a little pin drawing. So we have high peer acceptance to low peer acceptance, okay? And then we have high rejection, low rejection, okay? And when we have high rejection and high acceptance, this usually is the person that is very controversial. This is a person who comes into the situation and they're seen as that divisive person, okay? And so they're accepted, but I'm not sure if I want them close to me, so they're rejected. Of course, popular is kids who are highly accepted and low in rejection. And on the bottom end, we know that high rejection and low acceptance, these are rejected children, but children who tend to be highly accepted, lowly accepted, and low rejection, they're kind of those neglected kids in the group. They're kind of the ones that not paid attention to very much. Now, what's important about this is if we look at average, okay, I always think of this statement. When you believe in something, it means that you have enemies. You have people who don't like you. Because if you don't have people who don't like you, you actually don't stand for anything. And think about that. And that's what we mean by people who are average, where we want to be. Is yes, we want to have friends. We don't want to be rejected, but we know if we're not rejected by somebody, then who are we really as people? Who are we as a person or an individual? Okay. And this is, well, too, why I kind of want to bring up a rejection as a topic. Okay. As you all know, I study loneliness in my scholarly life, and I always have to separate being lonely versus being rejected, okay? Because loneliness is an emotional, motivational state. It is us feeling like there's something missing in our life. that there's something that we need to find, but there's also that protective mechanism. So we become very hyper vigilant and wary about other people. That's loneliness. It works on the emotional, if we want to put brain terms to it, it works on the serotonin, dopamine systems of the brain. Okay. Rejection, on the other hand, is something very different. When we're rejected by somebody, it's actually a physical event. Okay. If we put it in brain terms, the opioid systems are turned on when we receive rejection. Okay. And what I mean by the opioid system is that the same system that turns on when you break your leg, get a paper cut, get burnt, are the same systems that turn on when you receive some type of peer or social rejection. Okay. So on the peer acceptance level, we're talking about emotions and motivation. Okay. When we're talking about the rejection domain, we're talking about actual physical pain. Okay. And this is why when we get worried when we have people who are high rejected and high, but low in acceptance, because these kiddos are experiencing very negative emotions while at the same time experiencing true physical pain. Okay. And this is why we often see individuals who get rejected all the time and also don't have an accepted group. They tend to have struggles in life. They tend to be more like probability of becoming homeless or in poverty. They're more likely to commit suicide. They're more likely to end up in the criminal justice system, because not only are they feeling that emotional pain and that physical pain, they're trying to alleviate it. And this is where we get into things like antisocial behavior versus pro-social behavior. Okay. So 2 ways children can become popular is low aggression, highly desirable characters such as being helpful. But the other way a child can become popular is doing pro-social behaviors combined with aggression, meaning that they're manipulative, but they're still admired. Okay. And I can think of some examples of this. For example, my brother-in-law is a bully. I mean, he says really nasty things to people he shouldn't say nasty things to, but people admire him. Okay, they still I won't mention the community or anything. He is truly a bully, aggressive person, but he was able to get elected to a governmental position as a politician, and so he's a good example of this popular antisocial type. Is that everyone knows he's a bully, but everyone still admires him enough to put him into an elected office as an example. Okay. Versus what we call popular pro-social, which is people who don't use aggressive means, but we see these as highly desirable characteristics. And if I were to put these 2 kind of things in political views, and just from a political perspective, an example of popular pro-social would probably be Barack Obama. He didn't use aggressive techniques in order to get himself elected, and he didn't run his office as kind of a bully. Okay. But a political example of popular antisocial would probably be Donald Trump, who's very popular, but he uses bullying and aggressive techniques to control the social situation. Okay. And all of these things are learned. And this is the important part of why this is coming up in this time of the lecture. These types of approaches to social life develop during middle childhood. They develop between the age of 7 to puberty. is when a child is either going to learn to use bullying techniques in order to become popular, or they're going to use desirably helpful characteristics, such as being helpful, to become popular. Okay, so that's why it's important, when we think about parenting and looking at our children, are they using bullying techniques or are they using helpful techniques? Because that's really going to develop their character later in life. Okay, I mentioned peer rejection earlier, and again, I just want to emphasize rejection is a pain mechanism. In fact, most research on social rejection suggests that you shouldn't take the social advice of go take care of yourself, blah, 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 have time on your own, those types of things. No, what you really should do is take some Tylenol, and just like you would with a physical injury, get it working as soon as it can. So instead of saying when someone is rejected, say, take time for yourself, take care of yourself, what you really should say is, here's some Tylenol, take 2 a day for about the next 10 days, and go have fun, go out there. We're going to go to these social events and get them back into the social world, because that's how we take care of physical injuries. We want to get it back to its normal place as quickly as possible. Okay. And there's 2 ways children can become rejected. One is rejected aggression. This is aggressive, annoying, or socially unskilled individual who use hostile attribution biases. Or we rejected withdrawn, socially withdrawn and anxious. So in the rejected aggressive, this is the child who doesn't know normal socialization. And so they use aggressive tactics to end up actually being rejected. Okay. And then rejected withdraw is those kids that are scared of the social situation. They're scared of other children. And so they tend to be rejected because they have fears of the social situation. Okay. And then we do have, just like we do with pain tolerance, we have rejection sensitivity. And usually if you have a high pain tolerance, you usually are not that sensitive to social rejection. The lower your physical pain tolerance, the more sensitive you come to rejection, because it's all working on that neurological pain level. Okay, so kind of when you think about, are you sensitive to being rejected by others? Think about your pain tolerance and put them kind of in the same category. Okay. And again, there are ways that we can become more social based on this, right? So if we have a low rejection sensitivity and we have a low pain tolerance, before going into a social situation, do what you would do with a headache. I'm just going to say this again. Take some Tylenol. Take some ibuprofen. Do what you would do for a physical injury. Because that's what we're finding more and more in the rejection literature in neuroscience. All right, gang, for today, I'm going